because I'm going to talk for a while. Okay, no problem. I'll start though. So I'm going to be talking about Avalokiteshvara, Bodhisattva of compassion. And actually, I don't think I've ever felt more inadequate in some ways to give a talk. I think it's always a bit like that when you're talking about the Dharma, because you're constantly talking about something that actually is beyond what you know. But I felt it very much in sort of thinking about and preparing this talk. I just felt like I was trying to talk about something that to me seems so vast and beautiful and powerful, and also tender, that I kind of felt like it's probably beyond me to talk about in some way. And I felt that maybe I should just go and kind of put my head to the floor, as it were. But I suppose what I'm always interested in is these kind of what I think of as glimmerings that we have. It's like we read this stuff and we get some kind of intellectual understanding of the Dharma, but there's also something else, isn't there? Even though what we're describing is way beyond our experience, there's something which is what I think of as glimmerings, where there's some way we know something about this, even though it's other, it's beyond us. So in my inadequacies, I kind of, and it isn't, I'm not being falsely modest, but I kind of hope that somewhere my glimmerings around this might communicate with your glimmerings or something like that. Anyway, so Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as archetypal beings, and I suppose I think quite often about archetypal beings as kind of enablers in a way. I mean, who knows what they are, but because it's very hard to make a connection with something that is completely abstract, a quality like compassion or fearlessness or what's it called? Unshakability, what's that one that Akshobhya? Imperturbability. It's quite hard to kind of really make a full emotional connection. Whereas by having there being figures that in some way embody those qualities, we can make an emotional kind of connection with them, which is transformative. I mean, it's taken me a long time actually I was quite resistant to archetypal figures, and I felt it was like what you should do, so therefore I sort of dug my heels in, really. And I remember actually going on an early training for ordination retreat, and people were going, sort of a bit like, which bodhisattva do you like? And it just reminded me of being at school and going, which pop star do you like? Who are you into? Anyway, so it's taken me really a long time, but I've come to understand how transformative a relationship with a bodhisattva or a Buddha is, or at least I've understood some of that, and that what we, whether something's, I mean, let's not get into real or imaginal or whatever, but it's a bit like if you, in some ways, in your imagination, in your mind, in your heart, are carrying one of these figures, it has an impact. It has a transformative impact. A bit like, when people are anxious and they're kind of, you might be given a safe place to, that's often what's done, isn't it? That you have this safe place that you can bring to mind, and it immediately has a calming effect. But what we do with our minds, so an ongoing relationship with an archetypal figure, I think, does begin to have a very transformative effect on us, actually. It's quite a powerful thing to do. So bodhisattvas, as we know, probably are the kind of active element of a particular aspect of the enlightened mind. So Avalokiteshvara is, in a way, the active manifestation of the Buddha Amitabha, who represents love and compassion and meditation. So something about how a Buddha figure just represents the state, just the quality, and then somehow bodhisattvas have something to do with manifesting that in the world, in a way. That's why we sometimes see, well, like Green Tara has a foot coming down into the world. So, Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. Compassion is described, isn't it, as when metta meets suffering. When metta meets suffering, what arises is compassion, karuna. So when an open, unhindered heart encounters suffering, there is an instant response, a wish for that suffering to be ended, and also maybe a wish to act to help that suffering to end. And we all have that. We all have that response, to some degree in different circumstances. A wish for suffering. We know it in ourselves, and we see it in the world, all the time. Despite all the very negative stuff that happens in the world, it feels like nothing can quite quench that. Nothing can put out that fire of compassion. That, when there's some kind of tragedy, or when we hear of something bad happening to a friend, or, there's there's stuff happening in Ukraine or whatever, there is just this outpouring in people of wanting to alleviate that in some way. And it's limited, it's somehow limited in us by, our own self. It's not unbounded. We also have our, greed, hatred, and aversion that kind of get in the way of a completely boundless response. But it is very clearly there in us. And it may well be that it is something about how we are fundamentally connected to our true nature, which is interconnectedness, and that whatever those feelings of compassion are a kind of manifestation of how we are still in touch. In some ways, we are in touch with our true nature, even though that's very obscured by the three poisons, really, by the difficulty of trying to manage a self. So we often talk about the Dharma flying on these two wings of wisdom and compassion. And I was thinking about how kind of a wisdom arose out of compassion. I mean, the whole motivation for the Buddha's quest for wisdom was compassion, was his seeing the suffering of human beings, the sort of inherent suffering of human life. And from that, that was his motivator, to then seek wisdom. But also that the compassion of a bodhisattva, the compassion of Avalokiteshvara arises out of wisdom. It arises out of insight. So it's not the same as kind of being nice or being kind. It arises out of the bodhisattva seeing very clearly the human condition, really, seeing the kind of what samsara is like and what we are all trapped in, by having an insight into what reality really is. It enables a bodhisattva to see the kind of suffering that we are all in, that we are all caught in. That is the nature of samsara, the suffering of life being difficult, and painful sometimes, but also the suffering of, when we do get what we want, knowing that we're going to lose it. And I think the suffering of how we always get in our own way. There's some way that that we're always in our own way, in a certain way. So it's from that kind of the insight into reality that the compassion of a bodhisattva arises, the compassion of Avalokiteshvara arises, that there is something inherently tragic about human life, really, and that when that meets the heart, the open, unbounded heart of a bodhisattva, immense compassion for all beings arises. So it's not compassion that's about any kind of view about what's going on for that person or whether you like. It's just compassion. It's just absolute, unbounded compassion, love for all living beings. Got a quote here which says that it's an upswelling of compassion which is provoked by the realization of the true nature of phenomena. So in response to insight, an ultimate limitless combination of wisdom and compassion, a kind of synthesis where all distinctions between self and other are gone. So we're used to working particularly in the metta practice, with that wish: may all beings be well, may all beings be happy, may all beings be free from suffering. So in a way, when it's taken to its ultimate form, it becomes known as, it's the force that becomes known as the bodhicitta, which is the active wish to gain enlightenment, to free all beings from suffering. And it's the motivating force that creates a bodhisattva, is that wish for enlightenment for the sake of all beings. And it's a force that is present in the world. The bodhicitta, described as the merciful, liberated heart of the Dharma, which is very beautiful. And I think we could think of this as the power of the Buddha's compassion pushing out into the world for the benefit of all beings. So it's not an individual thing. It's a force that's present in the universe, the bodhicitta. And but it can arise through individuals, dependent on conditions. So in a way, it's a collective thing, and it's part of what we're trying to do here. Really, is create the kind of conditions that allow more and more compassionate energy to arise and that arises through individuals. But it's actually a connecting with something that is there in the universe. And the bodhicitta really is represented, Avalokiteshvara is the bodhicitta, really. He is the manifestation of that immense, immense love and wisdom for all living beings. So his name often is translated as the Lord who looks down, or one who always looks upon all beings with the eye of compassion. And I said he's associated with Amitabha, who is the head of what's known as the Lotus family. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are sort of divided into families sometimes. I think there must be lots of different systems, but there's certainly one system where they are. And they are what's known as the Lotus family. And the lotus is very often, the great lotus is very often connected with compassion and wisdom, actually. And it is that thing of transformation, isn't it? The lotus that grows out of the mud and the murk. Because in a way, compassion is sort of dependent on suffering. If there was no suffering, there would be no compassion. So there's a kind of, the lotus is dependent on all the murk, isn't it? The mud and the sludge, and the arising of compassion. is dependent on suffering. It's quite weird, isn't it, to think that if there wasn't any suffering, there wouldn't be any compassion, but I suppose that is true. I don't know. Anyway, Avalokiteshvara takes many forms in different countries. In Tibet, he's known as Chenrezig, and the Dalai Lama is said to be a sort of emanation, manifestation of Chenrezig. In China, there is the female Bodhisattva Kuan Yin, very beautiful figure. In Japan, Kanon, and in all those places, they're very central. It's not like they're marginal figures. It's like these bodhisattvas of compassion are massively popular devotional figures. And I think it is, I mean, it may be that we just all need that compassion, so we relate very strongly. But I think there's something very, very universal, like, I still feel like there's something we know, you know, that this helps us to know, which is some state, some vast state of unconditional love that we know something about somehow. Anyway, that's my theory. So the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum is Avalokiteshvara's mantra. So it's a sound manifestation. I'd always thought it was supposed to mean something about the jewel in the lotus, because Mani means jewel and Padme is lotus. But apparently that's probably not true. That might just be a Western thing. And actually, well, if you start looking these things up on Google or wherever, it's just extremely confusing because there's just lots of different theories. I mean, it's fine, but certainly it's got something to do with lotuses and jewels. But that might actually be the name of somebody. Anyway, it was quite weird reading it all. But one of the interesting things is that the 6 syllables relate to the 6 realms of the Wheel of Life. Quite a few of you will probably be familiar with the Tibetan Wheel of Life, and that it has 6 realms. And each of the different symbols relates to a different realm and sort of dissolves, has the power to dissolve the poison within that realm. I won't go into them all, but and to help people cultivate skillful antidotes. And, you know, if you go to Nepal or Tibet or Ladakh or any of those sort of Tibetan influenced countries, you see it written everywhere on these stones. Going into a village, there's just walls of stones with Om Mani Padme Hum written on. And you know, the prayer wheels and things, they're just sending out this compassion, sending it out. Yeah. Right. Okay, so on our refuge tree, the Triratna refuge tree, we have, where is he there? We have this figure of the 4-armed Avalokiteshvara. It's a white bodhisattva, and like most of the bodhisattvas, there is this, he's portrayed as a very beautiful youth. And again, it's, I think that is to help us make, well, to be attracted to a very beautiful figure. I always find it quite weird that they're very young. It doesn't work for me. I don't know if it does work for people in the West. I suspect it doesn't. I suspect we kind of want a figure with a bit more gravitas than a 16-year-old, but anyway. So culturally, I don't actually think that really works for us in the West. Feels slightly dodgy, but so, but he's on a white lotus, and he has these 4 arms. the central one holds what's known as the Chintamani. So the Chintamani is also a symbol of the bodhicitta, really, the wish-fulfilling jewel. Yeah, but really, I think jewels have, in this context, have something to do, a lot to do with transformation. You know, on a very material level, a jewel transforms poverty into wealth. It's a very beautiful symbol, and I think it implies that. Well, I mean, we can think about what it means, a wish-fulfilling jewel, because it's a. But it implies that it is the answer to our endless longings. Bodhicitta. So, and it's very beautiful that he holds it to his heart. And I have, the heart of Avalokiteshvara is vast. Then in his other two hands, one hand he holds a crystal mala, beads, and it's said that each one, as he moves each bead, he's rescuing another being from samsara, so he just keeps going around. So this endless compassionate activity. In the other hand, he has a lotus, symbol of compassion, purity, and the soul. It has a lot of associations with transformation as well, with our potential for transformation. So, and it's also said that the four limbs represent what are known as the Brahma Viharas, the divine abodes they're called. So, metta, which is the kind of core, metta, constantly developing the ability of our heart to be open, to be receptive, to be loving, to be open. And then those other three that, like karuna, which is what arises, compassion when metta meets suffering, mudita, sympathetic joy, which is what arises when we encounter good fortune in others, that we can feel that kind of joy for them, joy for other people. And then upeksha, which is that ability to remain open and steady and not pulled by craving or hatred or anything, just to be open and present. So those are what the arms are supposed to represent. I mean, these figures are just absolutely kind of laden with symbolism, and there's no right or wrong answer with symbolism, is there? It's just like, which is why when you start investigating it online, they all say something different about what everything means, which is absolutely fine, I think. Anyway, how are we doing? The figure, so there's also, there are lots of versions, there are lots of different forms of Avalokiteshvara with different numbers of arms and legs and all of that. What about legs, arms? Anyway, maybe not legs. Anyway, so the figure that I'm most familiar with is this one, which is here in two forms. There's a rupa there and a picture here of the 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara, which is quite an extraordinary image, really, of boundless compassion. So I thought what I would do would be fairly briefly tell the story of the 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara for those that may not know it, or also for those that do know it, actually. And rather than have a go at explaining what I think it might mean, I thought after that we would go into little groups for a little while for you all to ponder collectively what that figure might be speaking of, what it might mean to you, or what it might be hinting at. So I'll tell you the story first, and then we'll go into groups just for a little while. So, once upon a time, there was a young bodhisattva who was very, very keen to do what bodhisattvas do, which is release beings from suffering. So he was very, very aware of the immense suffering of the people of Tibet. He looked down at the people of Tibet and saw how much suffering there was. And he made a vow to release all these beings from suffering, and that he would work ceaselessly to do that, and that should he ever waver from that, may he be exploded into 1,000 pieces. So that was his vow. So he went into a very profound meditation for a long time, using sort of subtle means to effect change. And he meditated profoundly for a very long time. And then when he came out of this meditation, he again looked down on the people of Tibet and saw that they were still suffering, that his actions had not made a huge difference, despite the fact that he was working psychically as hard as he could, really, and that people were still living in terrible conditions. They were still they still had all the same sort of suffering that people have. And for a moment, he lost confidence. He wavered, and he thought, "I failed. What was the point of me doing all that?" Or something like that. And in that moment, of course, he exploded into 1,000 pieces. And he was in agony, and in his agony, he cried out to the Buddha Amitabha, whom he was related. And Amitabha saw the agony he was in, took pity on him, and kind of reconfigured him. So he put him together in a different form, which you can see here, which meant that he had 11 heads and 1,000 arms. So the 11 heads are arranged in 3 rows of 3, and there's a huge amount of symbolism around the colors of the heads and all sorts of things. So he has 3 rows of 3 heads, white, green, red, and different combinations. Then on top of that, there is a wrathful, dark face, and then Amitabha put himself at the top as the 11th head. He has 8 arms that you can see that they've got different kind of symbolic implements. He's got his hands clasped at the heart, again with the wish-fulfilling jewel, the Chintamani, and then he has various other implements, all sorts of different things to kind of draw in and rescue human beings. And then the other 992 arms, is that right? Are all spread out, each one with an eye. So there are lots of eyes. There are eyes in these heads, and there are these compassionate eyes on all these arms, all reaching out in this great halo. So that is the story. And I'm going to suggest that we have about 12 minutes, not very long, but if you would just find another 2, 3, 4 people just for a few moments, maybe 10 minutes, 12 minutes, and just see what you make of it. What does that suggest? And, maybe order members could scatter themselves around a little. Okay.